Today we are going to talk about bearings and distance. Alright, you can put A's to it. Bearings and distances. Okay, now today we are going to look at bearings and distances. You have been hearing about bearings and distances even from your junior secondary school. Alright, so today let's do something on it. So we have bearings and distances. Now let me start by divination, please. I hope you are with your written materials. Now, the bearings of one point from another point is the angular relationship. I repeat myself that the bearings of one point from another point is the angular relationship existing between the two places in an clockwise direction, starting from the North Pole, measured in degrees. In the bearings calculations, there are 4 cardinal points. In the bearings calculations, there are 4 cardinal points, which I'm going to draw it for you now. So, this is what I mean. These are 4 cardinal points that we have. Okay, this is called the north, this is called the south, this is called the west, and this is called the east. Right. So these are the 4 cardinal points under bearings and distances. Don't worry, we are having more calculations on this. Okay, so these are the 4 cardinal points that we have. And also we have what we call quadrants and their angles. We have what we call quadrants. Quadrants and their angles. Okay, now we have what we call quadrants and their angles. Now there are 4 quadrants. Okay, since we are having 4 cardinal points, that means we have 4 quadrants in the bearings calculations. Now the first quadrant is here. This is the first quadrant. This is the first quadrant. The first quadrant. The first quadrant. This is the first quadrant, and it is from, or you call it northeast quadrant. Northeast quadrant, or you call it northeast quadrant. If you don't call it first quadrant, you call it northeast quadrant. Why do you call it northeast quadrant? Because it's fall under north and east. So remember that this angle is angle 90. So you call it first quadrant, or you call it northeast quadrant. Now this is what I want you to know. This is what I want you to know. Do you know that this first quadrant lies between 0 degrees? This first quadrant lies between 0 degrees, okay, to 90 degrees. To 90 degrees. Okay, so this first quadrant falls under 0 degrees to 90 degrees. Now this is called second quadrant. Okay, this is called the second quadrant. You can call this second quadrant. This is called the second quadrant. All right. Now this second quadrant is called southeast quadrant. Southeast quadrant. Southeast quadrant. If you don't call it second quadrant, you call it southeast quadrant. Southeast quadrant. If you don't call it southeast quadrant, you call it second quadrant. Now, what I want you to know is that this second quadrant falls between 91 degrees. It is above 90. The second quadrant is above 90, so it is from 91 degrees to 180 degrees. Okay, from 91 degrees to 180 degrees falls under second quadrant. So anything above 90 is second quadrant. That is east-south quadrant. So anything from 0 to 90 is first quadrant or northeast quadrant. Now we also have the one we call third quadrant. We have the third quadrant. This is a stretch form of quadrant. We have the third quadrant, and you can call it southwest quadrant. Call it southwest quadrant. Okay, you can call it southwest quadrant because it's fall under south and west. So you call it southwest quadrant or third quadrant. Now, what I want you to know that this third quadrant is above 180. It's above 180. So it is from 181 degrees to 270 degrees. So anything above 180 does not fall under second quadrant anymore. It falls under third quadrant or southwest quadrant. I hope you need to know this. You're understanding me. Now, anything falls under 180 above is not second quadrant anymore because it is above 180, right? So it falls under third quadrant. So anything from 180 above. Now, below 180 is second quadrant. Okay, right? So we have the final in our list here known as the fourth quadrant. We have here, this is the fourth quadrant. The fourth quadrant. All right, it is called the fourth quadrant. Now, this fourth quadrant can also be called northwest quadrant. Northwest quadrant. It can also be called northwest quadrant. Okay, because it falls under the quadrant of north and west. So it can be called northwest quadrant. And what I want you to know that fourth quadrant is above 270. So anything from 271 degrees to 360 degrees is fourth quadrant. All right, anything above 270 falls under fourth quadrant. All right, so that is the bearings we have. And the quadrants we have on bearings and distances. There are so much calculations on this. So I'm just doing the introductory part to this so that your eye will be get prepared. So we have, as I said before, we have 4 cardinal points: the north, south, west, and east. Okay, and I define this as the bearing of one point from another point is the angular relationship existing between the two places in the clockwise movement. What I mean by clockwise movement is that it starts from like this. For example, it starts from here, it rotates like this. That is clockwise movement. Right? It starts from here. Look at my hand. It turns from this direction. That is clockwise movement. But when I said anti-clockwise, it turns down to your left hand side. Okay? But when I said clockwise movement, that means it starts from here. It may start from here and counts to the end. So that is a clockwise movement, or the clockwise direction. So that is where I'm going to end for the introduction to bearings and distance. So in my next class, I'm going to take you to a serious problem to solve. Now we can state the quadrant of the following angles. Then we also know the quadrant that they belongs to. For example, if I say, what quadrant does 140 belong? You go to your quadrant and locate where your 140 belongs, and I hope your 140 degrees falls under second quadrant, because from 91 to 180 is in between 140. So that is what we are going to do in our next video, and I will take you to what we call compass angles. Then I will deliberately give you a full explanation on that. So for now, that is where we are going to stop. So this is the introduction to bearings and distance. See you next time in my class. Thank you.